Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this episode of The History Guy. In 2023, the world hot sauce market was $3 billion, and it's expected to increase to $5 billion by 2030. Clearly, hot sauce is a hot commodity, but how did that happen? At some point in history, someone picked up a plant, took a bite out of it, felt like their tongue was on fire, and said, more. Were they brave? Stupid? Just really, really hungry? In fact, humans have a uniquely warm relationship with flame-flavored fruit. And the reason says a lot about what it means to be human. You know, I've been talking to you a lot lately about Squarespace. That's the all-in-one website platform, and thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring the History Guy. But the thing is, I really love this tool. It gives you so many options to create a website that is uniquely you, and that is all aided by Design Intelligence, a custom AI program that is powered by 2 decades of industry-leading design experience. And then it's very easy to add the tools that you need, like scheduling or payment or email campaigns. Look, a great website is great for your business, but it's also great for your hobbies. It's great for your personal identity. Everybody deserves a great website, and it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be difficult. It's a brave new world where not only does everybody need a great website, but everyone can get one. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thehistoryguy to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain using the code TheHistoryGuy. The story of how humans came to love chili peppers starts with a more basic question. Why are chili peppers hot? Dr. Joshua Tewksbury, an assistant professor of biology at the University of Washington in Seattle, who explains that he is interested personally as well as professionally in chilies, tried to answer that burning question: why are peppers hot? He told National Public Radio in 2008 that it has to do with the nature of fruit. The fruit on a plant is just there to advertise so that things can eat it, and plants like things to eat their fruits because they disperse the seeds. So that's common to all fruits. And then the problem is that when plants do that, they attract a lot more than the consumers they want. They attract a lot of things that don't help them at all, things that kill the seeds, and things that are microbes and fungus, and a whole bunch of other things, including mammals, that might chew seeds. The pepper's answer to that piquant problem is capsaicin, the chemical that gives peppers their heat. But why? Tewksbury spent more than a decade tracking down wild pepper plants to find out exactly what capsaicin does for the chili plant. Initially, there's a simple conclusion. Mammals, like rats and humans, have teeth and might chew and crush seeds, while birds do not. Birds are great for seeds, carrying them distances and dropping them, allowing the plant to reproduce. Capsaicin affects taste receptors, which mammals have and birds don't. Thus, capsaicin deters mammals and encourages birds to eat the fruit. Moreover, Tewksbury found that the chemical also slows digestion in birds, meaning that the seeds can be dispersed more widely and are more likely to germinate. It is an elegant answer. In fact, Smithsonian Magazine noted in 2009 some backyard birdwatchers spiked their birdseed with chili powder to stop squirrels from raiding feeders. But Tewksbury found it more likely that the adaptation was related to fungus. Smithsonian writes, more than 90% of ripe wild chili fruits contain signs of fungal infection. It is the primary reason seeds die prior to being dispersed. One thing that Tewksbury found was that capsaicin deters fungal growth. The more capsaicin, the less fungal infection. And the second thing he found was that peppers that grow in moist climates where fungus thrives tend to have more capsaicin. And this might be an important part of the story of chilies and people. Chilies offer a strange problem, as Dr. Catherine Shio, an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alabama, explains. Chilies are different from other foods that researchers use to learn more about ancient humans. For one, they have almost no nutritional value. People don't eat chilies for calories or to stave off vitamin deficiencies. Moreover, science journalist Jason Goldman noted in Scientific American in 2011, capsaicin, the compound that provides the mouth-watering punch of chilies, does not seem to have any addictive qualities whatsoever. And yet the preference for capsaicin is almost universal. Nearly every culture has incorporated it into their cuisine in some way for millennia. Why? Well, to answer that question, Jennifer Billing and Paul Sherman, biologists at Cornell University, compiled the Cornell Chronicle Explains more than 4,570 recipes from 93 cookbooks representing traditional meat-based cuisines of 36 countries. the temperature and precipitation levels of each country, the horticultural ranges of 43 spice plants, and the antibacterial properties of each spice. Their conclusion, reported in the March 1998 issue of the journal Quarterly Review of Biology, was that humans' use of antimicrobial spices developed in parallel with food spoilage microorganisms. That is, in places, notably hot climates, food spoils more quickly, and people who live in those climates are more likely to choose spicy food, since the spice is literally the plant's way of deterring the microorganisms that cause food to spoil. That explains not just the human taste for chili peppers, but also strongly flavored foods like garlic, onion, allspice, and oregano, which also have antimicrobial characteristics. They write, countries with hotter climates use spices more frequently than countries with cooler climates. Indeed, in hot climates, nearly every meat-based recipe calls for at least one spice, and most include many spices, especially the potent spices, whereas in cooler countries, substantial fractions of dishes are prepared without spices or with just a few. Billings and Sherman discount one popular theory that people eat peppers because they cause you to sweat, cooling you down. The problem with the eat to sweat hypothesis, the people in steamy places eat spicy food to cool down with perspiration, the Chronicle notes, is that not all spices make people sweat, Sherman says, and there are better ways to cool down, like moving into the shade. But don't humans simply like the taste? Linda Perry, an archaeologist at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, explains that the human chili relationship is very old, noting traces of chilies on ancient milling stones and cooking pots from the Bahamas to southern Peru. She concludes that people have been spicing up their food with chilies for at least 8,000 years. But she makes a different assumption. The idea wasn't, or at least wasn't merely because chilies were less subject to spoilage. Rather, she argues, chilies were domesticated early and spread very quickly just because people like them. Do you want a big pot of yams or a pot of yams with chilies thrown in? But Billing and Sherman argue that the two, prevention of spoilage and the human taste for spice, might be related, telling the Cornell Chronicle, why do spices taste good? Traits that are beneficial are transmitted both culturally and genetically, and that includes taste receptors in our mouths and our taste for certain flavors. People who enjoyed food with antibacterial spices probably were healthier, especially in hot climates. They lived longer and left more offspring, and they taught their offspring and others this is how to cook a mastodon. Thus, the taste for spicy food has both an evolutionary and a cultural component. The Chronicle reports eating is definitely one of the more social behaviors of Homo sapiens, Sherman maintains, and it's a good way to see the interaction between cultural evolution and biological function. The connection between food and human physical and cultural evolution is called Darwinian gastronomy. Sherman explained, I believe that recipes are a record of the history of the co-evolutionary race between us and our parasites. The microbes are competing with us for the same food. Everything we do with food, drying, cooking, smoking, salting, or adding spices, is an attempt to keep from being poisoned by our microscopic competitors. They're constantly mutating and evolving to stay ahead of us. One way we reduce foodborne illness is to add another spice to the recipe. Of course, that makes the food taste different, and the people who learn to like the new taste are healthier for it. Shio notes that food carries a history, and that every meal is a microcosm of human experience. That might be an irony, if the plants developed their spice partly to deter seed-eating beasties like humanity. But then it serves the plant when we cultivate the plants and spread them far and wide. So how did that all occur? Shio used a multidisciplinary approach to determine the origin of Capsicum annum, the species that gives us the jalapeno, poblano, and bell pepper, Thai chilies, and other commercially grown chili pepper varieties. She concludes that the first encounters between wild capsicum and early humans were likely in lowland areas near the Yucatan Peninsula. She concludes that the pattern of domestication was peculiar. We think domestication was around 10,000 years ago or even earlier, but through post classic Maya times, which is relatively late in the cultural history of the region, we see this continuum between wild and domestic. That's odd, as the University of Alabama News Center writes. Usually, domesticated plants are kept mostly separate from their wild progenitors, but chilies appear to have continually been interbred with wild varieties until quite recently. Shio surmises that the ambiguity might have to do with the pepper's adaptability. In fact, one of the reasons that we have bred so many varieties is that peppers are easy to manipulate. A pepper grower on Quora explains that within one human lifetime, you can manipulate heat up or down, color, shape, and size. Shiu writes, the modern domesticated chili pepper is adaptable and plastic, able to take root in many climates and be bred into many shapes, colors, and flavors. This was noted by an early European visitor. Columbus had stumbled onto the New World in search of spices of the Orient. In fact, that is how chili peppers got their name. Smithsonian Magazine explains that in 1492, the explorer encountered some plants cultivated by the Arawak Indians in Hispaniola. Convinced he had landed in India, he referred to them as pepper, an unrelated spice native to the subcontinent. He later wrote that the pepper of the inhabitants is more valuable than the common sort, and they deem it very wholesome and eat nothing without it. The chili part of the name, travel writer Jody Ettenberg explained in 2022, is derived from Nahuatl, an Aztec language. Smithsonian writes the Portuguese got acquainted with chilies at their trading post in Pernambuco, Brazil, and carried them with tobacco and cotton to Africa. Within 50 years of Columbus's voyages, Pernambuco chilies were being cultivated in India, Japan, and China. Biologist Gideon Lasco of the University of Philippines explained in 2022, unthinkable as it may sound today, the cuisines we have come to associate with spiciness, Indian, Thai, Korean, and Chinese, among others, had no chili peppers at all before their introduction in the 16th century onward. Prior to that, those cuisines relied on other spices or aromatics to add heat to dishes, such as ginger, likely native to southern China, or black pepper, native to India. The chili not only spread, it adapted. Esther Katz of the Institute of Research for Development of the National Museum of Natural History in Paris explained in 2009. When introduced, the chili pepper was immediately considered pepper. It became the poor people's pepper, as it allowed farmers who could not afford Asian black pepper to spice up their often monotonous food. But the mild peppers were also used as vegetables, and European farmers made them even milder. Bell peppers are probably the result of a selection made by Italian farmers, and so-called tomato and Hungarian wax peppers were likely selected by Bulgarians. So why did chili peppers become popular around the world so quickly? While the antimicrobial explanation might explain why people originally chose spices, Lasko offers some additional suggestions for why pepper culture spread around the world. For example, Lasko notes that psychologists have connected eating hot peppers and thrill-seeking behaviors, noting a 1980 study by psychologists Paul Rosen and Deborah Schiller of the University of Pennsylvania, who concluded chili likers are not insensitive to the irritation that it produces. They come to like the same burning sensation that deters animals and humans that dislike chili. There is a clear hedonic shift. Thus, they write, eating with chili, riding on roller coasters, taking very hot baths, and many other human activities can be considered instances of thrill-seeking or enjoyment of constrained risks. Goldman suggests that perhaps we seek out the painful experience of snacking on chilies while consciously maintaining awareness that there is no real danger to ourselves. I mean, after all, people seem to enjoy and actively seek out many other sensations that are otherwise undesirable but are ostensibly safe. The sensation of falling provided by roller coasters or skydiving, the feelings of fear and anxiety while watching horror movies, the physical pain experienced upon jumping into icy water, or even the feelings of sadness that come while watching a tearjerker. And there's a sociological component as well. Lasko notes humans can eat a diverse range of foods, so our decisions about what to eat often speak to much more than our biological or psychological needs. They reflect our societies and their values. Katz notes a saying among the indigenous Mixtec people of Oaxaca: we are strong since we eat nothing but pepper. Dr. Brian Dodd of Whitman College, Washington, notes in his book The Chili Pepper in China that chili peppers have become a critical part of regional identity in China. And Lasko notes that the leader of the Communist Revolution, Mao Zedong, was a native Hunan province who pointedly connected the revolutionary spirit with the ability to handle spice. Anthropologist John Holtzman of Western Michigan University concludes that chili spice is part of gender identity in Japan, where men were traditionally expected to prefer spicy foods and to disdain sweet foods. And how hot will people go? Smithsonian notes that the scale that scientists used to describe a chili's heat was developed in 1912 by Wilbur Scoville, a chemist at Park Davis Pharmaceutical Company in Detroit. He would dilute a pepper extract in sugar water until the heat was no longer detectable by a panel of trained testers. That threshold is the Scoville rating. A bell pepper, for instance, merits a 0, while a typical jalapeno falls between 2,500 and 8,000 Scoville heat units, or SHUs. Last year, the Naga Jalokia, which is cultivated in India, rated a whopping 1 million SHUs. You know, there's plenty more that I could say about the history of hot sauce. Tabasco sauce was invented in 1868 by Edmund McElhinney. Sriracha sauce was invented in the 1940s by Tenem Chakapak of Sriracha, Thailand. In 2018, 4 teenagers in Ohio were hospitalized as a result of a hot pepper eating challenge, and the original name of the band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, was Tony Flo and the Miraculously Majestic Masters of Mayhem, and now you know why they changed their name. But the history of hot peppers is really more about the history of humanity. Dr. Shio notes that you're sweating and your senses are under assault, and as a result, your body dumps endorphins and you feel almost this euphoria. Chilies, she says, inspire love and fascination. It's just one of those plants that gets under your skin. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.